If I had a nickel for every time a well-meaning person told me that long COVID is about grief. It's so fascinating. Even as a psychologist, we go to grad school, we get a little bit of training on grief, but really nothing of what we're taught gives us any instruction on how to manage that experience as a human. Nobody really knows what to do with grief, and there's so much fear and panic surrounding it. Hi, I'm Sally, psychologist, fellow COVID long hauler, and your long COVID coach. So today I want to talk all about grief, and I want to talk about it from the perspective of our nervous system and polyvagal strategies. So yes, grief is a feeling, and it is a big feeling that we experience in long COVID. And we do want to feel our feelings, but we also want to make sure that we do so in a way that is manageable and doesn't force our bodies into shutdown. This is still very much a work in progress for me too, but I do talk about it more in this video, which I'm going to link right here. There are many different kinds of grief, but there are three that are super relevant to long COVID. And the first is attachment grief. A lot of people talk about this type of grief in reference to trauma because it's really referring to whether or not we had the right kinds of attachment when we were infants. When we're born, and you may have heard me talk about this before, we're born with the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, i.e. shutdown, with the sympathetic nerve, which does fight or flight. But we don't have, until we're about 2 years old, the ventral branch of the vagus nerve, which does rest and digest. If we don't have a caregiver who is attentive and understanding of our needs as a baby, when we go into fight or flight, which is perfectly natural when we're hungry or cold or need our diaper changed, the body will automatically go into shutdown after a period of time. And those pathways for that shutdown mechanism start to develop much sooner than normal and much more strongly. Now, it's weird to think about grief for something that we didn't ever have, i.e. grieving an attachment that we didn't have sounds kind of bizarre. But really and truly, this is what we're confronting when we're doing nervous system work for long COVID. That lack of attachment is going to come up in our bodies, and it's one of the reasons why we have a propensity for shutdown and therefore are vulnerable to getting long COVID in the first place. And it's perfectly natural to be sad that other people had good attachment in their childhood and you didn't. And it's interesting how frequently this comes up. I noticed the other day I was looking at somebody's stories on Instagram and they were interacting with their family in a way that I just felt a little bit sad. And that is attachment grief. So the second type of grief is what we call absent or loss grief. And this type makes sense when you have lost something, which we definitely have with long COVID. And so this type of grief is going to resonate enormously. And it's probably the main one that people are talking about when they say long COVID is all about grief. We are definitely grieving the millions of components of our life that we have lost. Not being able to work, not being able to socialize, not being able to leave our apartment, the friends that don't call us anymore, that trip we never took, the relationships with our family that are now different. There is so much grief around all of this. And let's also not forget, for those of us who are athletes, the loss of our sport. In a nutshell, 95% of who we were has been taken away. That's a huge amount of grief and loss. And that also includes things that we didn't have, but we thought we might. So all those Olympic athletes who were training for the, was it 2020 Olympics? And then it became 21, and then most of them didn't make it anyway, and now most of them have retired. Their whole life they were working for that Olympic medal, and now they don't have it. Or all those people who were planning to start a family, and now here we are 4 years later, and they're still sick and they can't get started on that. The other grief is that we don't ever get to go back to that old life. Even when we do recover, it is going to be an entirely different life now. And then the third type of grief, which isn't really talked about much, is this thing called heart shocks. And you may never even have heard that word before. So heart shocks are when something happens to us out of the blue, surprisingly. For example, if you have a grandparent that has dementia or some other kind of slow progressive disease, that is not a heart shock when they die. You have lost them slowly over time, and that's tough, and the loss process starts well before their actual death. Heart shocks are when something happens out of the blue, unexpected. So, for example, you are living a wonderful life with your family and suddenly your husband is in a road traffic accident that was fatal. It's shocking. You don't expect it, you go into denial, they can't possibly have gone. And let's be honest, long COVID is also a heart shock. I remember that process when I got sick right in the very beginning, and I initially thought, I'm so glad I got this now because I'm going to get that herd immunity that everyone was talking about, and then I can get on with my life. And then somebody said to me, you know, Sally, they're hearing about people who have this post-viral illness, and you may not ever be better again. And I was like, what? That is the heart shock. Nobody told us this was coming, even though millions of people know about post-viral illness. And that is a massive heart shock, and there is huge grief attached to that. Something else important to know is that grief isn't just emotional sadness. When you look at an MRI of somebody who is experiencing grief, there are two centers of the brain that light up. One is the center that is responsible for physical pain, not emotional pain. And the other is the center for addiction. It really makes sense to us, right? Because most of us feeling grief do feel it as a physical pain in our bodies. We also do have that sort of craving concept which you see in addictions around the thing that we have lost. And especially those of us who are athletes, how many hours did we lie on the couch almost kind of jonesing for our sport that we desperately were craving? So this is very much a physical manifestation in our bodies. So how do we manage grief? This is the really important bit. So many people will tell you, and they certainly did to me, you need to feel the grief, you need to move it through your body. That is not true. If we feel our feelings too much too fast, we will get overwhelmed and our bodies will go into shutdown. What I'm here to tell you is only feel the grief when you're ready and when you have the resources that you know and trust that can support you to do it. This is very much where the word titration comes in. If you think you're ready, you can tiptoe in, feel that grief a little bit, and the second you notice that your body is saying, too much, you pull back and you use your resources to re-regulate your nervous system. When you are ready to feel that grief, I'm going to talk you through a somatic practice that can be very useful for doing so. But again, keeping in mind that titration piece. You may think you're ready, you may tiptoe in, you may need to pull back, etc. So first, making sure you have your supports. If you like a weighted blanket, if you like a cushion, if you like a foot support. And I'm also just going to take a moment to settle here. I can feel like my body just needs to wriggle around a little bit, get comfortable, and connect my feet onto my foot support at the bottom. Then we want to cue our body for safety. And one of my favorite ways of doing that is orienting. So I'm going to take off my glasses so I can see a long way. And I'm just going to let my eyes move around the room in a way that firstly lets them take in the whole room, and then secondly also lets them stop on something that they're drawn to that is pleasant. And especially when I'm orienting, I do like to check underneath the desk, behind me, and up to the ceiling, because those all are cueing my nervous system for safety. So then we're going to pay attention to our body and see where that grief is showing up. For me, it's often in that chest area. So I'm just going to put my hands until that feels comfortable. There we go. A little bit further down than I was thinking. So you're going to find where you feel that grief pain in your body. It may not be the same spot, and you're just going to put your hands on top. And you can see there I was just moving my hands around a little bit until I got the right spot, and then your body will tell you, oh, yep, that's the right spot. I usually like to have 2 hands, but you may find that 1 is better. So again, play around with that. And I'm noticing there that my body's also liking it as I just move that top hand with different pressure in different spots. And then what we're going to do is just hang out here. You can just breathe gently a little bit, and by that I don't mean doing any special kind of breathing exercises, but just the normal breath that you normally would take to get oxygen into your body. And as we sometimes notice when we're doing nervous system work, we're drawn to take a bigger in-breath as our body is just relaxing a little bit. And just hanging out and letting the breath do its thing. What you will find, if you are able to hang out here, that the edges of that pain will just slowly soften and it will dissipate. And that's what we're looking for. Just hanging out, just breathing gently as the edges of that pain just get softer and it seems like the pain is dissipating. If at any point as you're doing that process you start to feel overwhelm building up, that your body is maybe going more into fight or flight, then that's the time to just stop, step away, and then go into a resourcing exercise like, for example, maybe gently rocking, or sometimes I just like to swing my chair. Whatever it is that your body is drawn to do as a resource to naturally bring yourself back to regulation. And if we're only just there for a couple of seconds before we have to come back and do that regulation, then that's absolutely fine. And slowly, over time, when our body feels ready, we can just dip back in, and you may find the next time that the pain here is resolved and that you need to go to another part of your body. And we just keep doing that and keep doing that, tiptoe in, titrate, resource, etc. So I highly encourage you to save this video because you may need to come back to it over and over and over again as you gently feel that grief and let yourself move it through your body in that titrated way without going into overwhelm. And if you're ready to take the next step in your recovery, I highly encourage you to click the link below. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a tolerable week.